Awesome. Hi, everybody. Thank y'all so much for joining. Give me just 1 second, or actually, we're going to take the first few, like about few more minutes, about 3 more minutes. So we'll start the webinar at 5:35, just to give folks some time to log in and join the webinar. But thank you all so much for being here. My name is Kathia, pronouns are she, her, ella, and I'm the events coordinator for Central Valley Scholars. I'm also listed on the flyer for this webinar because I'm a current student at UC Berkeley from the Central Valley. So I have my Zoom background set as a Berkeley one. So I'll be here for support as well during the webinar and to answer any questions about my experience or about Cal. But yeah, go ahead and just trickle in. We're gonna give it a couple more minutes for people to join and then we'll get started. This is, of course, the UC application webinar hosted by Central Valley Scholars and Erica Sanchez from UC Berkeley Admissions. So thank you, Erica, for being here. And thank you all for being here as well. I'll probably be just repeating myself for these first couple of minutes, going over some Zoom logistics before we start. But by this point, you will have noticed that your camera and audio is automatically off when you join the webinar. That's because we're recording so that we can post it on our website afterwards, centralvialleyscholars.org. Please check it out if you haven't already. Highly recommend that y'all subscribe to our newsletter to just get all the up-to-date information about our scholarships and other programs. So definitely, follow us on there, or follow us on social media as well. Everything we have is just at Central Valley Scholars. Yeah, let me go ahead and do a time check. 2 more minutes for those of y'all who just joined. We're going to start at 5:35. And yeah, thank y'all so much for being here. Thank you so much. Awesome. So someone has asked if they need any materials or documents before we get started. You won't need anything, so you're good to go. If you want, at most, you can have a notepad ready to jot down some things, but otherwise you're good. And then thank you, Karina, for your question in the Q&A box. I'll go ahead and drop our, this will I think work for our Instagram, our LinkedIn, our Facebook, all of our different social media handles should be the same. Instagram is probably the best one to follow us at there. It's going to be at Central Valley Scholars. And then our website is same thing, centralvalleyscholars.org. Awesome. And then someone else asked if the recording will be sent to folks. The recording won't be sent. It will be posted on our website, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. And we'll also, at the end, send you the link to where the recordings are all posted. Okay. So sorry, y'all, for those who have already been using the chat. I actually just disabled it for attendees, but please put all of your questions and or comments in the Q&A box. We just do this for safety reasons, so that try to keep everything as anonymous as possible. Want to make sure people's names don't show up in the recording either, so that just for privacy reasons. But we are super excited to have you all here and to have you engaging. It's super, super great, and we promise that we will get to all of your questions or concerns. It might just have to wait until the end so that we can get through all the materials. Awesome. All right. Do another time check. Perfect. Looks like it's 5:35, so I'm going to go ahead and reiterate everything I just said for folks who just joined. So my name is Kathia, pronouns she, her, am the events coordinator for Central Valley Scholars. I'm also listed on the flyer because I'm a Central Valley student who applied to Cal and got in. So my Berkeley background is on today instead of my Central Valley Scholars one. But I'm going to hand it off to Erica from UC Berkeley Admissions to do most of the talking for today and kind of go over the logistics of the application. And yeah, so thank you all so much for being here. Again, Q&A box is totally open. I encourage you all to use it throughout the day. But yeah, if we can go to the next slide, I'll go ahead and do some housekeeping things first. So for those of y'all who may or may not already be familiar with our organization, maybe you haven't gotten a chance to check out our website or our social media, it's centralvalleyscholars.org and at Central Valley Scholars. We are an official 501c3, so we're a nonprofit from the Central Valley, made up of students from the Central Valley. Most of us are current undergraduate students or recent graduate students. And a couple of high school students as well. So there's definitely lots of opportunities to volunteer and intern with our organization. But our most important kind of offerings are our public workshops like this. Central Valley Scholars actually started in the summer of 2019 with in-person college readiness workshops that were free and accessible to any Central Valley Scholar students. or Central Valley students. And we also offer mentorship. So all of these have also been adapted to, of course, the online format that y'all are experiencing now, the workshops. We've just been turning them into webinars and having them online for y'all and posting the recordings so that you can revisit them for every webinar that we create. Just revisit those materials as they're kind of updated each year. But we're hoping to do in-person workshops again when COVID allows it. Same for our mentorship programs. We have two different mentorship programs, a Black student mentorship program and a first generation student mentorship program that has about 10 students each year. And it just kind of gives them like a hand-holding process throughout all of their college applications, all of like navigating, high school and scholarship applications and anything you can think of that falls under the sun and like the college umbrella. So that's the mentorship program. And we also offer over $12,000 worth of scholarships. We had actually the first LGBTQ scholarship in the Central Valley, so woohoo. We have that scholarship, our first generation scholarship, and our undocumented student scholarship for Central Valley students. So those are the first three that we had in our first year, and we've expanded to now have 2 Black student scholarships, a disabled student scholarship, and tons of others which you can find on our website. We offer research opportunities as well. And this is like more just like on an occasional basis. Every once in a while, we'll have our community health scholars program, which is super popular and encourages students to, do some research in the Central Valley and get paid for it. And of course, just like other empowerment programs throughout the year as we come across different opportunities to do so. But yeah, check us out on social media and on our website. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Awesome. So before we get started, a best practice that we like to develop here at Central Valley Scholars is just to do a land acknowledgement before every webinar or workshop. So I'll go ahead and read this off. Everyone's camera is already off, but if you all want to plant your feet on the floor, close your eyes, take a few deep breaths, you can feel free to do so while we partake in this activity really quickly. So I want to take a moment to acknowledge where we are and that the earth below our homes and below our feet is Yokut's territory, and that it has belonged to and been tended to by the Yokut's people for hundreds of thousands of years. And when white settlers arrived to what we otherwise know as the United States, they enacted genocide and theft of the land, labor, and resources, attempting to wipe out indigenous communities entirely. It's important to acknowledge the land we're living on and to recognize our history in relationship to the ongoing legacy of colonization in the United States. And to also recognize that the Yokut people are still here and that through resistance and resilience are still on the forefront of struggling for land rights, collective liberation, and an end to white supremacy. I invite you to take a moment to think about your relationship to this land and its history, and let those who have come before us in the struggle inform us on where we're going, so that together we can reimagine and collectively build a world where we're all free. Alrighty, so that's the land acknowledgement. I really just wanting to, again, as I said, it's a land acknowledgement. I'll kind of quickly, right after I introduce myself, drop a link in the chat for any of y'all who might not be from the Central Valley or might be from the Central Valley and not fall under Yokut's territory. You can find out which territory you're on with this link, and I'll drop it in just a second. But before I do so, I'll move on to just a quick introduction about myself. As I said, Kathia, she, her, yeah pronouns, events coordinator for Central Valley Scholars for I think just over 2 years now. I started during my freshman year at Cal, and I'm currently a 3rd year studying sociology and Spanish, hoping to dual major in both. It's been really exciting, and my home school was at Edison High School, so if anyone's from there, Tigers, let me know in the Q&A if you're here. But yeah, it's just a little bit about me, so if you have questions, definitely feel free to start dropping stuff in the Q&A box, but otherwise I'm going to go ahead and hand it off at this point to Erica to introduce herself.
Hey everyone, nice to meet you all. My name is Erica Sanchez. I use she, her, ella pronouns. I'm actually from the Bay Area, but I work in admissions at UC Berkeley, a proud Cal alum, go Bears. And also I've been working in the Central Valley as my territory. Now I've had the Southern Central Valley for over 6 years, and this year I actually have the Northern and Southern Central Valley portion. So I'll have the whole entirety of it, which is great. And I work not only as an assistant director in our office, but I'm also the Latinx community liaison. So that means I do a lot of work with Latinx student orgs and spaces on campus. So today we're going to talk about the UC application. Going to briefly talk about testing because I know that's a very popular question that we have. And then we're going to talk about the 2 key pieces here are talking about extracurricular section and the PIQs. So I already saw one question. Is it okay to start creating your PIQs? Of course it is. The sooner the better. especially if you're in your senior year. We do encourage you all to start in the summer before classes kind of pick up and things like that. If you haven't started yet, that's totally fine. I'm going to give you some advice today on how to go about answering those prompts. And if you do have some drafts and what I say kind of helps you reorganize your thoughts, that's totally fine too. So let's make sure, to give yourself some grace, and let's just be where we're at and kind of continue through. The other part that I'll do is talking a little bit about how to write about COVID-19 in the application, just because I know that this is something that's going to impact everyone, of course. So definitely have questions as you're going along. You don't need any materials. Feel free to take notes. And at the end, we'll have a Q&A, and Kathia will also be answering questions about her experience, like she said. So with that, I'll jump in. So first and foremost, testing. We are going to be what's called test-free. We've been test-free for the past year, and that's going to continue for the entire UC system. What does that mean? It means that you do not have to take the SAT or ACT for admission to a UC campus. That doesn't mean that you can't. You're still welcome to do so. And if you do take the SAT or ACT, those scores can still be used to help place you in certain classes. So if you want to go to a more rigorous math class, for example, or a language course, that's what the SAT, ACT can be used for. Sometimes it'll also get you, waive you out of certain requirements for graduation. So there is still a benefit if you do opt in to take the SAT. Now, also to be clear, we won't even see on the application if you took the SAT or not. So it's not a part of our consideration for application at all. Excuse me. And the other part is that we still are looking at AP exams. So if you did take AP exams, those will be counted as part of added value on your application. I do see a question. PIQs stand for Personal Insight Questions. And so for the UC application, we use personal insight questions and not personal statements. And we'll go into a little bit more. Apologies for using acronyms without defining them. Thank you for the question. Okay, so UC Berkeley, we use a holistic way of approaching the application. So I'm not just looking at your grades, and of course we're not looking at SAT scores anymore, but we're looking to see the full application. We want to know where you're applying from. We want to know what grades you have, what classes you took. And we want to know everything about you, though. We also want to know how you engage with your community. That is your home life, your school life, in your neighborhood, in your church, whatever spaces that you occupy, right? We just want to know what it is that you're doing on a day-to-day basis. And so extracurriculars are really kind of, they're kind of seen as like the what you do. It's like your resume, so to speak. And this portion here, the extracurricular section, is very important because we're going to have so many applicants. We have over 100,000 freshman applicants at UC Berkeley, and there's over 100,000 as well at UCLA, that it's really important that you are standing out by giving us as much information about you as possible. Okay, so don't leave anything off the application. If you think it's important that I know it, you want to put it on that application. So we'll talk about first the extracurricular section and how to fill that out strategically. And then we're going to talk about those personal insight questions, those PIQs for short. And you'll hear me say EC, and that's extracurricular. That's just short for extracurricular. Okay, so you're going to have all your classes and all your grades and all those things posted, but you're also going to have your extracurricular section. So there's different types of extracurriculars that you can put in the section, and we'll go through those different categories. The first one we'll talk about is activities and clubs. So what's important about writing an extracurricular section? You want to start with the title of that extracurricular. So an example is Future Farmers of America. When I first read for the Central Valley, I saw a lot of applications with the acronym FFA, and I was not familiar with that program at all. And I became quickly familiar, of course. But when you're writing that you're a part of an organization, you want to spell it out the first time you mention it. So in the extracurricular section, even if FFA is a very common acronym, you want to spell it out. Future Farmers of America, parentheses, FFA. That can also be true for FBLA, Future Business Leaders of America, right? Spell it out and then put the parentheses and what the acronym is. And after that, you don't have to spell it out. You can just put the acronym instead. So make sure you're putting a full name, because sometimes the same abbreviation is used for different clubs and organizations. So you want to be really precise and clear on what that title is. Now, another part of the extracurriculars is that we're going to ask, like, how much time did you spend in this extracurricular? So you'll be able to check off if you completed this activity 9, 10, 11th, or 12th grade. And also you'll have the grade option for 13. That's if you take like a gap year, that's if after you graduate high school, or if you're a transfer student, it would go on to the 13, like if you did it in community college or 4-year. So other things you'll want to think about is how much time a week and how many weeks a year you're doing this activity. So I use examples here. For students who are in ASB, the Associated Student Body, right? You might have been in ASB for 11th and 12th grade, and on average it's 5 hours a week, but maybe you're also on the prime committee, and for 2 months or 6 weeks, it's a lot more than just 5 hours a week. You can put ASB secretary, for example, as one of those extracurriculars and put those 5 hours a week, and then make a separate category for prom committee director as an example, and that you do that 6 weeks a year and that it's 15 hours a week to really show that there's that difference. But you want to put everything you've done in the extracurricular section and be very thorough. So those times don't need to be exact, they just need to be approximate. So think about it, take some notes about where you're spending your time. And if it's like off by an hour, we're not going to go do that deep of a dive and check, but we do want to have like a ballpark that's accurate. The next part of the extracurricular section is writing the description for the activity. So you have the activity name, the amount of time you've spent on it, and then the description. Those descriptions are the how and the why you participated in the activity. So avoid describing just what the activity is. You want to talk about what you specifically did. One example is soccer. There's a lot, but I'll see this at least a few times every year. A student will say they're on the soccer team, and in the description, it'll be soccer is a sport where you try to get a ball between 2 goalposts without using your hands. Now, that is a very literal description, but it doesn't actually help me understand more about that activity. So in the description, you'll want to focus on, if you were like, for example, soccer captain of a team of 20 players, selected by the coach to be captain, ran drills weekly, had to motivate teammates, and made it to playoffs. So that would be more of like a description that we would want to know. Anytime that you can quantify or put a number in, that's really helpful as well. That's why if you are the captain of a team, how many teammates are there? Were you selected by the coach? Were you voted in by your teammates? And this can be true for like a club as well. Spanish club, baile folklorico, like what was your role in it? What did you do? You don't have to be the president or the secretary. You can also just be a member, and that's totally valid. And you want to include that. Were you volunteering? Were you doing fundraisers? What is it that you were doing in that organization? And you want to put that into that description box. You can also mention things like, was this a large, well-funded club? FFA is an example where in some schools it's a very large, well-funded club. Or maybe it's a journalism club and there's only 3 members and it's a shoestring budget, but you make it work. Whatever the situation is, they're all valid situations and activities. So you'll want to just describe those so that we understand, like, what is it exactly that you contributed and what were you working with, so to speak. Okay. The next type of activity is sports and competition. So again, put in the title, if you're playing a sport for your high school, you can put like school soccer for Edison High School, or you can put club soccer. You can put them together, for example, like soccer, club, and school, and you can put that like in parentheses. But if you have the space, I would separate them. So soccer for Edison High School, club soccer separate, right? And you'll want to do that because that helps us understand like where you're at. And maybe your school soccer team doesn't really get too far in advance, but your club soccer team, you've gone to play regional, state finals, etc., or vice versa, right? The time, again, estimate. And if you do have like an off season and an on season, like, again, just kind of estimate it. It's not like a huge deal. And then in the description, What's really important is we want to know what level does your team compete? Are you competing at a school level in the district? Are you competing at a regional level, tri-county, all of California, national, international? Letting us know that. Something else that I think is very common, especially in the Central Valley, is did you have to travel in order to compete? Did you have to travel long distances in order to compete? How often? How long was that traveling? Does that impact your day-to-day with school? Some things to consider. And with COVID-19, of course, I know that it was kind of shut down, but just think about this still can impact your freshman, half of your sophomore year, and potentially this year as well. So again, just make sure that you're thinking about your role. How were you given those responsibilities? What are those responsibilities? And how many teammates did you oversee, for example? Okay. All right, another form of leadership that you can put in the extracurricular section, which often they don't get thought of, they're non-traditional forms of leadership is what we call them. Non-traditional because a lot of people think I have to be the captain, president, CEO of something. That's not always the case, and that's totally fine too. You want to think about things like childcare. So if you're taking care of your younger siblings, nieces, nephews, cousins, maybe you have elderly family members, or maybe you just have an adult that you have to take care of for a number of reasons, right? There's so many reasons. If you, for example, have a parent with a mental health disorder that you have to help support, that is a form of extracurricular. So I use myself as an example. I have a younger brother. I have 3 brothers. I'm the only girl. And so I have a younger brother who's on the spectrum and has Asperger's. So after school, I didn't really have access to clubs and sports because I was expected to come home and help watch him, take care of him, etc. Right? So even though my school has so many wonderful activities and sports and things like that, and I was within walking distance of my school, I wasn't able to really access those activities because I was spending my time instead at home, right? So you want to write that in there as well. So for some of you, maybe transportation is an issue. And we'll talk about that in the personal insight questions that you can write more in depth about that. But you may not have access. Maybe your parents don't let you stay after school. Maybe you have chores. Maybe you have to work a job. So really important to think about those non-traditional forms of leadership. So again, that childcare in particular, I know is huge. You want to estimate how often you participated, how many hours a week, weeks per year. So for example, if every day after school, you have to spend 3 hours watching a sibling while your parents come home from work, that is 15 hours a week, not counting the weekends, right? 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. And then if you're doing that for the whole school year, that's usually like 30-ish weeks a year. Maybe you're still doing that childcare during breaks in summer because family doesn't really have a break. So you can put that on there as well. And then you can also think about not just like the childcare portion, but if you have if you have like a business that your parents are doing, and we're going to talk about jobs and non-traditional forms of jobs too that can go in there. And this is also important for transfer students. So a transfer student, if you have a family of your own, if these are your own children that you're taking care of, you can absolutely put that in there as well. And you'll want to put in the description, what did those responsibilities look like? Watch 3 children, 12, 13, and 10 years old, or like 5, 6, 7, however old they are, right? Had to connect them to the internet because of Zoom, assuming, right, like if your parents are working more, you have to take care of the siblings, or if they're your children, etc. Were you the technical person having to cook and clean? Like, what did that look like? Doing laundry, having to do so many different things, right? Think critically about what are these non-traditional forms of leadership. And again, I do see some questions popping in about transfer. Absolutely, transfer students, we don't expect transfers to have as many extracurriculars in particular if they're like working a full-time job, going to school and taking classes, and especially if they have a family that they have to take care of on top of that. So it's just putting as much as you can in there, no matter the situation. We want to know everything. Okay, so work. I really wanted to emphasize this part. I think a lot of students, there's some fear around putting work on the application. So, and some other information as well, but there's something called FERPA, which stands for the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. FERPA protects your application so that we cannot share any information with anyone else, including other departments in the government. So we don't talk to the IRS, we don't talk to Homeland Security, we don't talk to anyone. your information is secure and it's limited to just the UC Berkeley admissions staff. And so we're not going to use it for any other purpose than to just make sure that we're like looking at your application holistically. So this means that you can list work that was paid like under the table. So if it was an informal job, I know a lot of students in the Central Valley do tend to work in the field with their parents as young as like 9, 8, 10 years old. And sometimes students will put that they work, but from 16 on, child labor laws, of course, and things like that, there's some fear with that. I want you to know, do not worry about that. You will not get in trouble. You will want to absolutely include that work in the application under the work section. Again, we understand sometimes in the summer, work picks up as opposed to the school year. You might be working full time in the summer and you can differentiate between the two, but maybe you're still working throughout the school year on Saturdays or during breaks, things like that. And this could also be, you know, COVID related, and we'll talk about how to write about that if you did have an increase in work with COVID. All right, so it doesn't have to be super formal. So if you're, for example, if you have a family who sells tamales and champurrado on the, like out on the street or something like that, or tienen un puesto, like you have a little stand or whatever, like that also counts. Or if your family owns a business like a liquor store or a mini mart or something like that, and you're working and not getting paid, that's still a job that you're doing. Especially if you're thinking about, do you have to run like finances? Like if it is a food stand, do you have to like calculate how much do we spend? How much do we make? What was the profit? Like all of these things are super important. So we really want to encourage you to list every single thing on that application because it's going to be helpful, especially if you're working full time in the summer. You know, there's a lot of students who don't work in the summer and they're doing internships, they're doing all these different things. But if you have to work or if you have to do full-time childcare, you need to let us know that so we know that that's what you're doing with your summer. Okay. Okay, so the other part of the work section is that we do ask how do you use your earnings? This is not because we're trying to judge you or judge how you're using your earnings, but it could be, you know, you're saving up to buy your own car. It could be that you're paying your own cell phone bill. It could be that you're helping pay a mortgage or helping your siblings buy clothes and food. So we just want to know, like, how are you using your money? Are you helping support the family by supporting yourself or actually paying the bills for the family? So just letting us know, like, how is that being used? Again, this doesn't get reported to the IRS or anybody else at all. So make sure that you're including that information as well. Okay, we were gonna go into the personal insights now and talk about that a little bit more. And again, at the end, we'll take questions. So just make sure that you're taking some notes and don't worry if there's some questions that haven't been answered, we can answer them at the end. Okay, so personal insight questions, PIQs, we call them, we have you think of them more as like interviews. They're not writing samples. We're not looking to see how good of a writer you are, if you can use a semicolon, if there's a thesis in the response. It's not an essay. This is not like an English class at all. We really want to hear your story. We want to hear your voice. And we fully expect that your PIQs are filled with you saying I and me. And I know that for me in high school, that was a big no-no. You're not supposed to say, I think this and I feel that, and me, me, me. But here you are, okay? This personal insight question, you're absolutely expected to use those two terms often. So when you're answering the prompts or trying to pick which prompts to respond to, it's really important that you don't worry about like, which ones can I answer very literally? I would even put them to a side and think, what are like 4 things that I want this admissions officer to know about me and my context and my situation? Is it that you live in a rural community where the transportation might be very limited? So, and you live really far away from everything. So it's very like you have to do a schedule and there's like 2 cars for like 5 adults and like 3 kids and, you know, having to work that out. Is it that you live in a very urban environment and you have to take 2-hour bus rides to get to another school? You know, just I want to know what your situation is, right? Because everyone has a different story, and if you don't tell me what your story is, what your context is, I'm not going to know, right? So let's go through and let's talk about these different prompts, and maybe even talking about them will help like keep you like, oh, maybe that sounds interesting, I can write about that. And I'll always use myself as an example about how I would respond to these prompts. Okay, some basics for the PIQs, you have to answer 4 out of 8 prompts, all right? 350 words maximum each prompt. 350 words is essentially a very long paragraph. It is not an essay again, okay? This is like short, sweet, and to the point. Choose questions that give us the most information about you. Determine what you want to write about before selecting those PIQs, like I mentioned. And for those of you who are curious, there's not like a secret combination of PIQs that improves your chances of being admitted. When students are like, what's the best PIQs I should answer? I always say the ones that show me the most who you are, the ones that really like let you shine as an individual and that I learn the most about you from. Okay, so the first prompt, and also I'll point out that for transfers, there is one required question and we didn't put it on here. The first question that transfers must answer is how they prepared for their major. And so in order to write about that, like we're not asking like literally what courses you've taken, we want to know what your interest is in the major you're applying to. And that's specifically for transfers. For those of you who are in high school and are applying as freshmen, this also includes students who are in middle college and are obtaining an associate's degree simultaneously. You're applying as a freshman. So you get to pick 4. There's no mandatory question for you. Okay, so prompt 1, describe an example of your leadership experience. So this question is asking you to talk about how you've displayed your leadership. Now remember, we've already read your extracurricular section. So if you put that you were the captain of a soccer team and that you were the president of the Spanish club, things like that, you don't need to repeat and relist all those things in the personal insight questions. This is where you would take something and expand or elaborate on it. So for example, for me, I could write about watching my little brother. That's a form of leadership because I had to come home, set an example for him, and I had to show leadership in modeling good behavior for him. And then, you know, just having that like older sibling dynamic and writing about that at length, right? So that's one way to answer this prompt with one situation, right? And so you can adjust the situation to fit most of these prompts and you'll see how when I go through all of them. This could be also how you show leadership in your community setting, church, like I had said before. It could be clubs, it could be if you're a big part of the Latinx community or the Black community where you're at, then you can also write about that and how you've taken on that leadership role. Prompt number 2, describe a creative side and how it can be expressed in many ways. So this is a pitfall question. I think a lot of students answer this question because they think, oh, they're asking about creativity. So they want to know, do I paint or draw or sing or, you know, etc. And it's not meant to be taken so literally. I mean, if painting and singing are really crucial to who you are as an individual, absolutely, please write about that. But if it's just to tell me that you read and paint from time to time, it might not be the best use of that prompt in particular. And you want to think creatively even about how you respond to this prompt, right? So you'll want to think, one form of creativity could be that you have to cook dinner for a week for 4 kids at home, and you have $20 to do it. So it's like chopped kitchen in your kitchen every night, right? For me in my situation, I could say that I had to show creativity in how I learned how to tutor my little brother because he is neurodivergent and very literal. And so how did I have to change the way I was tutoring, right? That forced me to be creative in how I express and how I describe things. So that's taking another aspect of my situation and highlighting it in this creativity. And if you're going to write about, you know, ballet folklorico, like, was that important for you in your culture? Was it important for you in other aspects? Like, describe that in the personal insight question. So you can say, I demonstrate my creativity through dance. And for me, dance is important because it carries a story and it's tied to my culture, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So that is important to think about. It's not just art and humanities, things like that. It can also be your leadership, right? It can also be these other forms of creativity. Prompt number 3, what is your greatest talent or skill? Now, when you're responding to this, 9 times out of 10, I'll read the beginning to this prompt as a student will start with, the difference between a talent or a skill is a talent is something you're born with, a skill is something you develop. I don't have a talent, I have a skill. You can delete that line. You don't have to define it for me. I just want you to jump into it. So what is a talent or a skill that you feel really proud of? This could be time management. This can be the talent or skill that I have is calming my little brother down and helping him understand certain mathematical concepts in particular, right? Or it could be your talent or skill of being a mediator in your household, at school, when there's tension and drama. So, it doesn't actually have to be what you would consider your greatest talent or skill. Like, for example, if you can tie your shoe with one hand, that's really cool. And I don't know anyone else that can do that. But does that help me understand more about you and your context? So that's why it's important to think about, what is a talent or skill I want to highlight that I want the submissions officer to hear about? Okay. The next prompt, how have you taken advantage of a significant educational opportunity or worked to overcome a significant educational barrier? And the way that you can respond to this, so you can see it as a positive, you can see it as a deficit that you kind of work to overcome. This can be things like attending workshops from Central Valley Scholars. It can be being a part of AVID. It could be any number of things like that, right? And so you can look at things as being deficient, and that's totally fine too. So if you have an educational barrier, for example, you live really far away from school and your only mode of transportation is one car to share between a large household, and maybe you had to organize like rideshare, like, okay, on Mondays, mom is going to go to work and drop me off at school an hour early, but that's when I'll do my homework and I have it all figured out. So like that could be an educational barrier that you've had to overcome. Or maybe you're not allowed to, like I said, you're not allowed to be at school after school hours. Maybe you have strict parents. So what have you done with that time instead? Maybe it's that you didn't have enough money to go be a part of a certain trip for an organization that you're a part of, so you had to fundraise. And that could also be a barrier that you overcame. And then an opportunity, it could just be that, your school offered community college courses on campus and you took advantage of it and you thought that that was significant. You can write about that. Or maybe you were not able to take AP Calculus, but you could figure out how to take AP Calculus at the community college because your high school didn't offer it, or you got bumped from the class. So that could be another example of how to use this particular question. Prompt number 5, describe the most significant challenge you have faced. So this question, and I think a lot of students sometimes think, if I don't have a significant challenge, I'm not going to be admitted. And that can be further from the truth, right? We're not here to measure how significant your challenges are. What we want to know as admissions officers is, have you faced a challenge and have you shown perseverance? Now, not all challenges can be overcome. For example, if you have been unhoused, like that's not just something you can be like, I'm going to will my way through it. How do you meet that challenge every day? How do you continue and survive and thrive as best you can? If the challenge can also be learning a solo piece for your band at school, that could have been a challenge for you. Don't feel like you have to answer this though. And again, the important part is not necessarily the challenge itself, it's how you overcome it or how you deal with it on a day-to-day basis. That's really what we want to know. And it's important because when you go to college, I don't care how smart you are, I don't care how many books you've read, college is going to kick your butt when you get there. And you're going to have to learn how to navigate a whole new system, a bunch of new people, large classes and things like that. And you might get knocked down a few times. I got knocked down more than a few times my first 2 years at college, but we want to know that you can pick yourself back up, that you can dust yourself off and kind of keep moving and encourage yourself through this process. So that's why we ask this question. It's not that we're looking for the person with the most significant challenge, right? So keep that in mind. Prompt number 6, your favorite academic subject. This is a place where if you have like a real big passion for something, you can write about it. So if, for example, we'll go with this FFA one, if you're really into animals and like caring for animals or maybe biology, you can talk about how that's your favorite academic subject. And if that's your passion, that you want to be a veterinarian or something like that, you can absolutely write about it here and how you've taken advantage of FFA, and go into more like elaborate detail, or 4-H, or whatever it is, right? You can write about it in more detail here. This doesn't just have to be like you literally writing about what your favorite subject is if there's no connection to who you are as a person. Maybe it's history is your biggest, your favorite topic, but you want to give me that why, like why is it significant? An example that I've seen often is history is my favorite subject, and I got really into it once I watched a documentary that had Latinx folks or that had Black and Brown folks that looked like me, and I realized that my history was a lot more complicated than what I had learned before. And it really tuned me into like my identity, and then I became more active in different community organizations, right? So you kind of see this like trajectory and what you've done with that. So you can absolutely write about that. Or maybe you've done research of your own, like you taught yourself how to code, or you've taught yourself like chemistry stuff with YouTube. Like it can be any number of things, right? But you'll want to say why it's significant to you. And it shouldn't just be like, I really like English because I like to write and I don't really get anything else from that, right? So make sure you're digging deep and answering some questions on a deeper level. Prompt 7, what have you done to make your school or community a better place? Now, that can be defined. You can define the community however you see fit. I always used to think community just meant like your neighborhood, but it can also be an identity. It can be a space. It can be a collective shared identity across, you know, different areas. So like the Central Valley, that's a community, right? Like a larger community. A smaller one could be the city or town that you're from. An even smaller one can be the high school that you attend. An even smaller one can be like a Latino student in the high school that you attend in your specific grade, or an avid member, you know. So community can be huge and it can be super tiny. And it could also be off campus. So think again of home, any spiritual centers that you're part of, any community organizations, things like that. And then the last prompt is, it's kind of a catch-all. It's if you haven't been able to share something that you thought was important, then you can put it here. A lot of students kind of see this as an opportunity, like, oh, I have to show them how I stand out from everyone else. It doesn't, like, we're not asking you to compare yourself to your peers. And like, I'll see students do like, well, in my school, everyone else does this and that and this, and I do this, this, and that. And it kind of feels like you're trying to compare yourself. And it's like, we don't need that, right? We just want to hear more about you and want to know about your context. So you can do that in a way that doesn't try to like judge other people or incorporate what you think other people go through. Like, just tell me what you go through and tell me what your context is. So that's super important. And again, this can be anything. This is really just for you if you're like, the other questions I didn't know how to respond, but I wanted to talk about this thing. So that's what that is for. Okay, we're getting close to the end now. All right, so the additional comment section, there's two. The first one I'll talk about is the additional comment sections in the PIQ section. There's 500 words in the additional comment section. You can do whatever you want in that section. We do not want you to answer like another PIQ, like you're like, I actually wanted to answer 5 and I'm putting my 5th one here. Please don't do that. But it can be a list, it can be a paragraph, it can be short sentences, or it can be a combination of all of the above. Maybe you ran out of space in your extracurricular section. You can just bullet point and put more extracurriculars in the additional comments. Maybe I, for example, have had a student when I worked at a high school who got really ill their sophomore year and they had to go on a medication that made them really drowsy and put them in a funk. And so they didn't have the best GPA the second semester of their sophomore year. Now I saw the dip in their grades and I said, what happened there? And when he explained, I was like, okay, you got to make sure to put that in your application. He really didn't want to focus on that illness because he felt like it was so central to him in his everyday life that he didn't want to like highlight it in his application. That's totally fine. But I did convince him and I had to ask him, like, in your additional comments, at least drop a line about that. My second semester of sophomore year, I became ill and had to take medications with side effects that impacted my ability to attend class, to take or to do homework, etc. Right? It could also be if you have a parent or loved one who was ill in the household. So many things are happening right now with COVID. Maybe you have a sibling or a parent who is dealing with like a drug addiction or is incarcerated, and you know other things have happened to impact your household life. That's okay to write about as well. I know students, again, there's this this hesitancy to do that because you think we'll judge you. I'm not here to judge you and your family in that way. I just want to know what your context is so I can know like what you're dealing with, because if any of those things are happening, that's going to impact you. And you don't need to focus the whole PIQ on it if you don't feel comfortable. If you do, that's great. If you don't, you still want to give me at least a little bit, right? Something was happening my fall semester of junior year, XYZ thing happened. It impacted my grades in this way or my attendance, etc. Okay. You can also put like little bits about your school into the additional comments, and it can be the same for everyone. Like you can get together with your friends and do this, and it's not considered plagiarism. So if you went ahead and everyone at Edison High School, we're just gonna keep going to Edison, Kathia. Everyone at Edison High School can put the same blurb. not saying this is true, I'm making it up. We can only take 3 AP classes a year, max 3 APs. We're not allowed to take APs before our junior year. We had our AP calculus teacher left in the middle of the school year on maternity leave, and so the class was taught by a substitute. We didn't have any science teachers in our 9th grade year. Like any kind of bit of information like that, you'll want to put in there, because I won't know about it if you don't tell me. So if like there was an AP class you wanted to take and they got canceled, let me know. If there was an AP class you were enrolled in and they kicked you out, let me know. All of this information is super important. And maybe if there was an opportunity to take community college classes that ended up not being available for you because of transportation or cost or anything, let me know. Put everything you can into the additional comments. I want to know everything. Okay. There's another additional comment section, and that is in the academic history. That is 500 characters, so not words, characters. And this one, you could put things like on the APs, like I had just mentioned, if they're quick and sweet to the point, you can put them here. And again, this one, I really don't recommend like paragraphs because it's so short, but if you can fit it in there, by all means. And so you can utilize both spaces. So 500 words, this can be a little more detailed, and the 500 characters can be a little more to the point. Whoops. Okay. So here's some examples of academic history, additional comment section. And I'll just read one of them. And of course, you'll have the recording. You can read over it later. But the first one is, the Engineering Academy is limited to 25 students per grade level. I was selected out of 170 applicants. We are required to complete Calculus BC by senior year, so I took 2 math classes every year. Our engineering lab work happens 0 period from 7 to 7:50 a.m. Monday through Thursday. We are also required to sit in on seminars Wednesday after school, 4 to 6 p.m. This little paragraph just gave me so much information. So I want to highlight that there's only 25 students, 170 applied. All right, they have to take Calc BC by senior year, and they doubled up on their math, and that they're taking O period every Monday through Thursday, in addition to a 2-hour seminar on Wednesday. So I'm getting a ton of information. And if you tell me you're part of the Engineering Academy and don't explain it, I don't know what that means, right? So if you have an academy at your school, if there was a program you're a part of, for example, AVID, like if you had to apply to it, or were you like just selected, that's totally fine. But giving me that kind of information. So if there was an application process, for example, to be an FFA or AVID or Model UN or whatever it is, you can always ask the people who are in charge, like, hey, how many people applied? Can I ask that? Like, how many people applied? How many did you select? And then just think about like what additional work you have to do. Okay, so that is really helpful. I will read the second one actually. The second one here is a non-academic change of life circumstances. At the beginning of my sophomore year, I was in a serious car accident and spent an extended time in the hospital in physical therapy. For 2 months, my school district approved in-home teachers for me. I was able to maintain progress in all subjects except math. I fell behind in trigonometry and earned a C in my first semester, the first time ever. Over the holiday break in December, I started studying math independently through Khan Academy's free online program. I was able to catch up, and I received an A at the end of the year. So again, the student is giving me a timeline, super important as well. Whenever you talk about a challenge or something that happened, give me a timeline, tell me what school year, tell me what semester. They let me know about the grades, they let me know what they did Khan Academy, they studied independently, and that they had like this whole trajectory. And they did it really sweet and to the point, concise. So that's really important. So take note of those two. I'm not saying that you have to have had either of these situations. It's just an example, right? Okay, writing about COVID-19, what my biggest recommendation is that you want to be very specific, right? COVID-19 is impacting the entire world, but the way it impacts you as an individual is going to be unique to you. So you want to think very specifically, how did it impact you, your family, your living situation? Did your parents work more? Were they laid off? If they were laid off, did you have to work more? Were you having to be the tech support at home for your younger siblings and anyone else that's there? Were you picking up shifts and having to work more in addition to helping out the siblings or other folks in the household? So letting me know specifically, how has COVID-19 impacted you specifically, right? let me know that. That is super important. And when you talk about how it impacts you, make sure you think about how it impacts not just you as a person, but also like, how does it impact your day-to-day, your schoolwork? Like, do you have time to study? Are you sharing a kitchen table with 3 cousins, 2 aunts who are watching Caso Cerrado on TV at full blast, people running around, and it's hard to focus and concentrate? Let me know that. Do you still have issues accessing Wi-Fi, even if you have a hotspot? Or do you not even have a hotspot? Do you have the technology you need? Was there a lag and gap in between you receiving that technology? All of those kinds of things are really important. And some people are like, I don't want to write about COVID because everyone's going to write about COVID. That's fine. COVID, I'd be shocked if you didn't, honestly, because let me know how it impacted you. And if it didn't impact you, you don't have to write about it. So don't feel like you do. Okay. All right. That is at the end. We have time for some questions. I'm happy I got to finish a little bit with at least a little bit of time, Kathia. Are there any questions in the Q&A that you wanted to raise?
Yes, thank you all so much. And I've been like aggressively typing this whole time to try and get through as many of your questions as possible. Also, Erica, let me know if you can't hear me. I know there was issues with that in the beginning, so I apologize, but perfect. Okay, I'll move to a quieter spot. But we'll go ahead and start from the top, and we'll work our way through these. But someone asked, if you do bad on the SAT, do you have to submit it?
No, you don't have to submit it, and we won't know if you do or don't.
Awesome, perfect, thank you. And someone said, will I be disadvantaged if I do not turn in any AP scores?
Not at all. So we don't look at anything as negative on the application. The way we're trained is that we're only here to add building blocks. Like everything you give me, like, oh, solid grades, lots of rigor. I see the extracurricular section is strong, but I'm not going to be like, oh, but they didn't take the SAT. Oh, but they got a B. Like, I'm not going to take away. I'm just adding blocks to say yes.
Awesome, awesome. Sounds good. And then someone asked a really great question. They said, are extracurriculars activities and the amount of time mentioned, or like the estimated time spent doing those activities, should it just be between freshman and senior year or something else?
Between freshman and senior year. So this is, again, assuming you're applying as a freshman. If you're applying as a transfer, we don't look at high school anymore at all. So if you're applying as a transfer, don't put anything from high school, really focus on post high school, and we don't even look at your grades from high school either.
Awesome, awesome. And then someone else asked, how do we explain COVID and how it cut opportunities to join extracurriculars? Where would be maybe the best place to do that?
That can be an educational barrier you can write about, right? So you can spend time in that PIQ and talk about how COVID has posed that barrier for you, that you're not able to do activities or sports in particular. And if you were able to pivot and do Zoom meetings or things like that, you can write about that. And if it just fell off, like Zoom fatigue for sure, you can write about that as well.
Awesome. Let me work my way back up to the top of the questions because there's quite a few of them. But someone asked for the slide about the SATs. It said it was not mandatory for admission for 2021 or 2022, but is it mandatory, or will it be mandatory for admission in 2023?
No, so this is actually in effect through 2024, at which point the UC will revisit it. We were never going to go back to the SAT, but the UC was going to have an opportunity to develop its own standardized test. Excuse me, but what I can tell you is we have not developed our own standardized test, so there will not be any test put in place as a result. So no SAT, no ACT. It looks like for the foreseeable future.
Mm-hmm. Okay, awesome, awesome. And then I did want to add a quick note to this, just since I know a lot of these questions maybe have to do with that answer. And a lot of the ones you've answered so far are about that. There are a lot of experiences, such as work experience, extracurriculars, etc., that you have multiple options for how you can write about it or include it or list it in the application. So it's totally up to you whether you feel like, say, a work experience or extracurricular, whatever it is, the specific activity. If you want to just list it and talk about it quickly, you can do that. Or if you want to spend, a personal insight question talking about how it made you a leader or different things, that is also appropriate. It's entirely up to you all. But yes, and also for those of y'all who have questions about, is this a good enough experience? Is being in band, is doing an internship, is all of this, worthy of being in the application? The answer is yes, always. If you feel it's important to you, then it's important enough to put on the application. So you can just prioritize whatever you talk about and how much time you spend talking about it. But we have a lot of those. But yeah, I'll go ahead and go back to the Q&A. Also, a lot of questions too about experiences, whether it be with work or otherwise, outside of the United States. That is also welcome. It does not have to be school-related activities or jobs, and it also doesn't have to be just things that you did like during the school year, maybe, or like during school hours. So your weekend time is also very valuable as well as after school hours.
And can I add, I see another question like that's kind of similar. Is it frowned upon that I went to 3 different high schools? It is not. All right. So if you did go to a bunch of different high schools, if your family was moving around or if there was a reason why, you can absolutely write about that. That can be an educational barrier. That can be a personal challenge you faced, or it can also be like the question number 8. So it's not going to count against you in any way, but if you do want to write about if that was a challenge for you and if there was a reason why that was out of your control, letting us know that that just adds more context to your application.
Okay, awesome. And then, okay, which has more weight in admissions, grades, or extracurricular activities? And does the committee have some formula or weight gauge?
Great question. So if you're from the Central Valley, I'm likely going to be one of the people reading your application. For freshmen, 2 people read your application minimum. Usually about 4 or 5 will read it though. And we're looking at everything. So we're looking at the grades, but we're also looking at the classes, right? So if your school offered a ton of AP and honors and you didn't take any of those and you got straight A's, how would that compare to a student who took like 5 APs, 2 honors, and maybe got a B or 2 here or there? We still would have to look at the extracurriculars. We still have to look at the PIQs and take everything into account. So there's not like an index of scores. There's not like a maximum minimum kind of thing. We're really looking at everything holistically.
Okay, awesome. And then someone asks something sort of specific to Berkeley. I'm assuming it's someone who already got in, but if someone is nominated for Berkeley ROHP scholarship for the 2021 cycle, can they have the potential to be nominated again if they took a gap year and are reapplying again as a first year?
That is a really specific question that I actually don't know the answer to. What I would recommend is reaching out to RHOP, and they should have like a contact us section on their website, and then ask that question via email or call them up. But they would know better than me.
Okay, awesome. And then just to reiterate too, because I know there's a lot of people who asked, and I can paste it again in the chat if it is helpful, but you will be able to find the slides, of course, which are being recorded right now for this presentation at centralvalleyscholars.org/resources. That's where all of our past webinar recordings can be found. So you can watch those. You can watch our UC application webinar from last year already. This particular one will probably take about a few days up to a week to be posted. We don't have a link or access that we can give to you right now just because it is still currently being recorded, but definitely check out the website afterwards. Just keep checking it. And then I know Erica has contact information that she can give as well, but yeah, so just to reiterate that point.
Do you mind if, so I'm looking at the question myself and I'm seeing a lot of people ask, is it good or is it bad? And a lot of different things. What I'll tell you is that nothing is automatically good or bad. You should absolutely write about everything. And so even someone asked about should I write about a disability? If you have a disability, absolutely, I encourage you to write about it, because then we can hopefully plug you into DSP services, which is Disabled Student Program Services. That's totally fine. There's nothing that's bad. And if you feel for example, is it bad that I didn't take the AP exams? It's not bad. But if you feel there's a reason why, was it the cost? Was it that most students don't pass the AP exams at your school? That the teacher was out most of the year? If there was a specific reason why you didn't take AP exams that you felt was out of your control in particular, feel free to put that in the additional comments. That can go under educational barriers. So nothing is good or bad, especially if you are able to explain what the situation was. And so that might be something you put an additional comment or as a PIQ. And I'm seeing a few other things really quickly. These are the PIQs for all of the UCs. So the UC system uses one application. It's a UC application. We're not on the Common App at all. The CSU has its own application. It's another system. And the CSU's application is different. They won't require PIQs. So you'll want to check out the CSUs separately for sure. And even how I'm telling you about to write the PIQs, that's a very UC specific methodology. When you're applying to private schools, they have a very different way of reading applications. So you'll want to go to one of their sessions on how to do applications. It's a very different different experience. And if you're applying to multiple UCs, which I encourage, even if you're AB 540, if you qualify for a fee waiver, then you're going to get up to 4 free UC schools and 4 free CSUs. And you can absolutely apply to all 4. And something to note, we don't all have the same majors. All the campuses are a little different. Like we're sister schools, and like siblings, we're not all the same. And then every other school except for Berkeley will let you apply for a primary major and then an alternate major. Berkeley only lets you apply to 1. And we have a ton of sessions that we're offering too through Discover Berkeley. And I will make sure Kathia gets that information to put on the resources so that you can share that. So definitely check out all of our websites. We're gonna have like different sessions that we will elaborate more on these different topics.
Awesome. And then someone asked, so what happens if I started to join clubs my senior year because they didn't realize they were interested in maybe college or applying until senior year? Is that going to look suspicious?
You know what? If it didn't occur to you till senior year and that's when you joined all these clubs, then you can absolutely write about that, right? That you can let us know what was the change, what was going on before that, and what was the change. And then also just keep in mind, for those of you who decided in your senior year that you really wanted to pursue four-year education, if you weren't able to get the grades or the GPA that you wanted, and maybe you don't get admitted to the school of your choice, know that transfer is a great option. 30% of UC students are transfer students. And of those, 95% come from California community colleges. So if you're interested in going to a UC, your best bet is to go to California Community College and then transfer in from there.
Okay, so someone said that they transferred to 4 schools during their freshman year of high school and asking if they would need to contact every school for a transcript.
So typically if you're transferring schools, they will let you, like the last school that you attend will take all the schools before you and put your grades on that one transcript. It can get a little more complicated if you went to school in another country, because then you need to have those documents sent. But if you do have that concern, what I'll let you know is the application, everything is self-reported. We do not ask for official transcripts until you've been admitted and you decide to come to our campus.
Awesome. And okay, so someone said that they did their sophomore year online for mental health reasons. Could they write about that in the application?
Absolutely, please do. Write about any and all things that you think are important, that impacted you as a person or impacted your schoolwork, that you may think like, oh, if there's a grade dip or something like that you want to write about, please do it. And sometimes there's straight A students and people will tell you, oh, it's just so easy for you, you just get straight A's all the time. Sometimes you might still have a really rough year or semester and you might have gotten straight A's, but that doesn't show the amount of stress and pressure you might have been under.
Awesome. And then someone asked, is there a website? I think a couple of people asked this, so super important, and I'm actually looking at the link right now, but someone had asked whether the UC application was separate from the common application, which it is. Common application is for private schools, but there is like one website, and this, I think, to be clear, in case it wasn't already clear to folks, the personal insight questions that you choose, the 4 out of the 8, are going to be the ones that are sent out to all of the schools. So a lot of y'all have also asked, should I talk about my specific major interests? Should I talk about, you know, the college or the specific UC that I am applying to in the application? Erica, I don't know if you have recommendations about that, but I feel like it's maybe not, especially if you're going to be sending it to, you know, multiple UCs. And I think someone had also just asked if you can change your application once you have submitted it. I don't believe so, unless there's like some hidden way that I don't know about. But yeah, so it is, you know, just a one-time submitted.
Sure, yeah. Great questions. I have the website for the UC application. It's universityofcalifornia.edu/apply. I'll drop this in the chat, and I just Googled it and found it.
Oh, awesome.
So you can Google a lot of things and find them. Honestly, like that's how I do most of my stuff. Hold on. Okay, so that's the link for the application. The application is due November 30th. You cannot submit until November 1st, though. The application opens August 1st every year. So if you've started your application, great. If you haven't, I would suggest that you get started, even if it's just to input like the really standard information, like your name, your address, all of that, and your grades and classes. And as you're filling that out, make sure you have like a transcript with you so that you're inputting everything accurately. That's super important because it is really difficult to make a change once you've submitted it. Yeah, it's like it's a 99% chance you won't be able to change it. There are some times where we will allow for changes, but it's very difficult.
Awesome. And then someone asked if applying with an intended major or sorry, applying as unintended major would affect them in any way, make them seem less competitive, anything like that.
It's going to depend. It's going to depend on the UC, and it's going to depend on the college. So for students who are not sure what they want to major in and they're applying to UC Berkeley, I highly recommend that you apply to the College of Letters and Science. Now, that is our largest college. It has like 75% of our students are there, and we admit to the college. We don't admit to major for letters and science. If you're interested in the other colleges and finding out what else we have to offer, definitely check out Discover Berkeley, and I will drop a link for that as well. I'll just pop it open right now if you want to look at another question to ask.
Awesome. And someone asked if the freshman admission process is similar for transfer students.
The transfer process is very different. And so you'll want to make sure you're attending some transfer specific sessions. So this is our website, admissions.berkeley.edu. And I'm showing you here. So we just posted these. These are the different sessions. So there's a prospective freshman session, personal insight workshop for freshmen and transfer. There's going to be a student panel for freshmen and for transfers. There's going to be alumni panels, admissions overview for transfers. Make sure you're attending these different sessions, and you can register for them on this website. And I will put that link in the chat right now as well.
Awesome. Okay. So someone asked, or what is the difference between, like, a lot of people have asked, what is, should paid versus non-paid internships be included under work experience? So, do you want to let folks know if like internship experience can still be listed as work experience?
They can go on either. So if you have the space, usually you won't fill up the work section. So if you want to put it there because the rest of your ECs are pretty filled up, then you can do that. Because I believe you get 20 or 25 spots for the extracurricular section. And so there are some instances where students will fill it up. So yes, you can absolutely put it under work. It doesn't matter where you put it as long as you put it in the application.
Awesome. And when is the UC application deadline, if not already mentioned? And is there an early decision?
It's due November 30th. There are no early decisions for the UC system, and every campus will release their decisions on a different timeline. Typically, Berkeley is usually the last UC to release decisions, and that's usually the last Thursday in the month of March that will release. Other UCs will start to release decisions as early as February.
Awesome. And let me check the time. Okay, so it's about 6:40. Erica, let me know if you want to keep working our way through some more questions, or if there are any patterns that you've seen. I think there's just so many that I'm scrolling through them all really quickly to see if there's any kind of overarching ones. But yeah, just to reiterate again, for those of you who are asking where a certain experience fits best, it's totally up to you. Whatever you feel, wherever you think it fits best, given that it was your experience, you'll know best whether you want to write a whole maybe kind of essay about it in one of the personal insight questions, or if you want to just list it as a quick extracurricular and estimate your hours. But
yeah, so honestly, yeah, for all these questions about where do I put it, it's just important. It doesn't matter where it goes as long as it's in the application. I mean, obviously your grades and classes need to go in the grades and classes section, but if it's about extracurriculars or wanting to provide an explanation for something, as long as that's in the extracurricular section or additional comments or the PIQs, it's going to be fine. As long as it's on there, we're going to take it, we're going to review it, and it's going to be considered added value. Again, nothing negative on the application. There's never going to be something where I ding you. And I might bring up some of these topics, but I said it before, for example, if you have an incarcerated family member, if you have a family member with an addiction, you can choose to write about those things. And I think there's a fear that we will look at you negatively, and that's not the case at all. If there was something going on that very much impacted you, we want to hear about it. And it doesn't matter where you put it in the application, as long as it's there. And it's not to say, again, if you don't have those kinds of challenges, that doesn't count against you either, right? I just want you to know that it's about speaking your truth, and it's about using your authentic voice. So don't worry about bringing out a thesaurus and using fancy $10 words. I don't want to have to pull out a dictionary to read your PIQs, because if it's not something you would say in every day, day to day, don't use that word. Just make sure that your voice is coming through. That's super important for us. And again, like I see a lot of fear, and there's a lot of fear and anxiety around admissions. I understand that, like, it's gotten really competitive. And something else I want to say is that I saw some questions about like what would make me reject a student. And I hate to see that question, because the truth is so many of the students who apply, if not all of the students who apply, could do really well at Berkeley. Everyone has it in them, right? It's just we don't have enough spaces to offer all these wonderful students. So if you do apply to an institution like Berkeley or UCLA, you don't get in, I just want you to know, like, that does not take away from who you are as a person. It's so important to know that there's just so many different people like that can really do well here, right? And I think a lot of people hang like where they go to college is like a measure of their self-worth, and it's not the case, right? You can do amazing and brilliant things a lot of different places. And of course, I want to see students from the Central Valley apply to places like Berkeley and LA, because I don't think there's enough. So that's why I'm doing things like this too, like not just because it's my territory, but also because the diversity in experience and diversity in thought is super important. So we don't want students that all look the same. We don't want all students with 4.0s or 4.5s and so many AP classes. That's not the point of who we're trying to admit. We want to admit students with different life experiences, with different perspectives that come from different backgrounds, because it's when you have these different life experiences that you can bring a nuanced thought, that you can bring a nuanced perspective, and you're still getting like you're still bringing that with you in that grit, and that is what we're looking for. So we really want you to be able to express that in the application. What makes you a fighter? What gives you that grit? What are you passionate about? Maybe in your family, college is not something you talk about on a regular basis. Maybe you can make fun of, maybe you called a nerdy square bear like I did, for loving school, and that's okay. Like you can write about those different things, because not everyone has the same experience. That's why when people are asking like, should I do this or do that? Does this look good? Does this look bad? I don't know. Like honestly, nothing looks good or bad. Your life is your life, and your experience is your experience, and all you can do is represent who you are as accurately and as authentically as possible, and then just trust that if we accept you, like that's good, and that I don't want you to pretend to be someone you're not and hope that you get into a school based off of something that's not who you are. Does that make sense? Like it's really, to me, important that you just be your authentic selves and that you speak truthfully.
Awesome. Alrighty, I'm about to drop in the chat. We can go for a couple more minutes, or up to you, Erica. And then, yeah, I think a lot of these are sort of repetitive questions, or hopefully we've gotten through the bulk of them. But I want to drop in the chat really quickly a link to a feedback survey that will take like 1 to 2 minutes. Super helpful for us to know how we can improve this webinar for the future, how your experience was. Let me know if anyone has trouble accessing it, but it's just a few quick questions, asking kind of testing your knowledge on certain things, or asking, whether you like gained anything from this workshop. So we would love your feedback. If you could please fill that out now when you get the chance, that would be awesome. And we'll keep going through some of these questions. I know I saw one I asked a couple times is about how many years of math are required in high school to apply to UC?
3 years required, must reach Algebra 2 trigonometry. And you have to take that year of geometry. It's like complicated, but basically you want to get to at least Algebra 2 trig level math. And then you can definitely talk to a counselor to get more information. If you are in California, you can also look at this A through G list. So I'm going to do it live on my screen. I just Google A through G list. I don't even remember the website, but it's this first one that comes up, highschoolarticulation.ucop.edu. So this is for freshman applicants. You can put your high school in, so we'll put in Edison. It is the one in Fresno. And we can look at the course list. And I can look to see math is the C requirement. It'll tell you like what level math that is. So you can take Algebra 2 pre-calc, and that's gonna be equivalent to Algebra 2 trigonometry, which is what you need. So you can see the course list of like what would qualify as A through G as well.
Okay, awesome. And then I'm just answering someone else's question, but just to be safe, someone asked if the UCs do interviews during the application process. It's a great question, but I think this only happens very rarely, and it will most likely just depend on the school. It's not like a required part of the application, though. I think interviews would only happen if it's like for a specific scholarship or something else.
Right, we do not do interviews as a part of the admissions process across the UC system. However, there are some very niche, like small majors that might require an interview, but it'll usually be, they'll ask you to record it. Like for Berkeley, it would be the MET program, Management, Entrepreneurship, Technology. And if you do want to find some more information on all our majors, you can go to guide.berkeley.edu and you go to undergraduate degrees and programs, and it's an online shopping version of our majors. They're all listed here in alpha order. And you can also say, I only want to look at majors offered at Berkeley's campus. I'm interested in literature, and I want to go into the arts and humanities. And it'll sort out which majors would be a good fit. These aren't the only majors. Of course, this is like an algorithm, but there's other ones, but this can be a good starting point. And so maybe you see comparative literature and you want to find out more, you can click on that link and get a lot more information about that particular major at our campus.
Awesome, awesome. And some other kind of UC Berkeley specific questions are if there are like a certain number of seats for UC Berkeley freshmen.
Yeah, so every year there's going to be a certain number of seats that we can't over enroll, of course, because we have a limited number of space on campus and like dorms, and then the city of Berkeley. So every UC is going to have a limit on how many students we can enroll. And so our admit rate this past year was about 14 to 15% because we had about 110,000 applications. We admitted about 12,000 or 13,000, and we enrolled about 5 or 6,000.
Okay, awesome. And then a few people have asked about taking gap years fresh out of high school, or whether or not it's better to start at a community college and then go to Cal, or then apply to UCs, or just like gap years and transferring. What are your thoughts or recommendations, if any?
Yeah, these are great questions. So if you are taking a gap year, that's not going to negatively impact you at all. So if it is something that's important to you, make sure you do that. What to note though, is if you take a gap year after graduating high school, you cannot attend a college or university, community college in the fall or spring semesters after you've graduated. So if you graduate this year, for example, you can take classes the summer after you graduate, but not the fall or spring. Because if you do, that would make you ineligible to apply as a freshman. You would have to apply as a transfer. The other thing to note, I had mentioned this before, but for those of you who are doing middle college programs, so like design science high school in Fresno is one of them, where you're taking community college classes and getting an associate's degree. A lot of times students think if I get an associate's, I can apply as a transfer, and that's not true. If you're working towards a high school diploma, you still have to apply as a freshman. And it also probably works in your benefit because applying as a transfer is very different. Applying as a transfer requires that you meet 60 minimum transferable units per semester at community college, major preparation, general education, and a minimum 3.0 in those classes. So those are some things to note. And if you apply as a transfer when you're actually a high school student, you will not be admitted because you're ineligible to apply as a transfer. So some things to think about. And if you decide to go the transfer route, absolutely community college is the best place to go. If you go to a CSU, the transferring between the two can be difficult because we have to look up the transferability of courses. So I do recommend community college if your goal is to transfer into a UC. Absolutely community college, and make sure you're plugging into like the transfer resource centers on those community college campuses. It can take more than 2 years to transfer. So I always tell students, if you're worried about the cost, because I did see some financial aid questions, if you're worried about costs and if you have fee waivers, apply to UCs and CSUs, because if you're admitted, Berkeley will show you what your financial aid package will look like. So if you get admitted, that same moment, you can click on your financial aid package and you can see what it's going to cost. But at least you get to make a decision about whether or not you want to attend if you apply, because if you don't apply, you won't even have that choice. And sometimes if you go to community college and it takes more than 2 years, it can end up costing you more money to do a transfer, but it's going to depend just on what your situation is, right? So definitely attend some of these transfer info sessions as well. But I would say apply even if you're worried about the money, because you can always make that decision later once you get your admission decision.
Awesome. Alrighty, so it's about 6:50. We have a lot of questions, but I think a lot of these have been addressed. It's just a matter of kind of going through them. But Erica, I don't know if you have already, or if you still want to give out your contact information. But yeah, again, for those of y'all who are still having questions about where to find the recording afterwards, you can rewatch it as many times as you would like on our website, centralvalleyscholars.org/resources. It should be posted within a week. So it won't be posted right away, but we do have examples from our past UC application webinar from last year, I think, possibly the year before as well. So you can view all of the existing resources on there, and this will soon be added on there as well. So you can review it, watch it as many times as you want, take notes on it, anything like that. And if you're still having questions, of course, Erica just dropped her email in there, so definitely screenshot that, save it, and have it ready. Let me see, awesome. And I did want to, cool, so just to transition out of the Q&A portion for this webinar, apologies to anyone who was unable to get their question answered. For those of y'all who have questions about financial aid and what does it look like once you have actually applied, we will actually be doing some more webinars on those the following month in October. We are going to be doing two separate ones. So if you are someone who's undocumented or receives the DREAM Act instead of the FAFSA, that will be its own separate workshop. So we will also be doing that one in October, and then we will have the one on how to apply to FAFSA specifically. But I would also recommend talking to counselors about it ahead of time, or just starting to, get those cogs moving and like thinking about it, mentally preparing for it, because it is sort of a lengthy process. But please feel like encouraged to apply to FAFSA and or the DREAM Act if you even like think that you qualify. Definitely come out to these workshops. We really want to help you all figure out whether you're eligible and how to start applying, because it can be difficult. And I would also encourage y'all, like, even if you don't think that you're eligible for any aid, definitely apply. I think the biggest piece of advice I could give you all is to just apply, even if you think that you're not going to get it or not going to get in. You'll be surprised, honestly. And I think, especially as folks from the Central Valley, sort of our like perceptions or thoughts about what is considered low income is like drastically different from the demographics of people that we find at the UCs or at more prestigious schools. So you might be surprised, is what I'm saying. So never, sell yourself short. Definitely try to take advantage of all those opportunities as much as possible, and apply for private school scholarships as well. We will also be doing some webinars on that, hopefully. So October is going to be on financial aid, how to get financial aid, and all those kinds of things, whether you're a documented student or undocumented student. Those resources will be there, and we do have recordings on both of those webinars from last year. So if you want to start checking them out, you can do so at centralvalleyscholars.org/resources. And then we will also have information on private schools, hopefully in November, right after we talk about financial aid. So keep an eye out for all of those things. Sign up for our newsletter if you haven't already, and follow us on social media. We post about all our webinars on there. Yes, and I think that is it. Thank you all so much for sticking around. And definitely, I think on our website, centralvalleyscholars.org, we have like our general email. So if you like feel really strongly about your question, or it's like a very specific situation, you can try emailing us as well, and we'll try to get around to it. But otherwise, I hope everyone has a good evening, and thank you, Erica, again, so much for being here and so much for answering all these questions and giving out such great information. It's been a pleasure, getting to hear from everybody and working with you. But I think that will go ahead and close out. Alrighty.
All right, thanks, Kathia. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good night, everybody. Bye-bye.